The 6 steps to understanding the soil food web. So number 1, we're going to look at understanding what compaction is in more detail and why that's bad. Number 2, we'll look into understanding the function of each of our organisms in a healthy food web. Then we'll get into different plant needs and the balances of each organism group. So how we need to have balanced organisms, the trophic pyramid, in order to facilitate different plant needs. We want to then start to try to really understand nutrient cycling in the soil. So what's exactly going on and how we can facilitate adding to or improving that cycle. You want to learn how to read a soil chemistry test. So if I have a soils test on my property, what is it going to kind of look like? What are they testing for and how would I interpret that? So we're going to go over that. It's pretty simple, but it's nice to have seen something first. And then after that, we can understand what's called a soil biology test. So these are 2 types of tests that we can look at, try to understand them, try to work forward. So what is compaction and the term consolidation? So compaction is the process of which stress is applied to soil. So whether you step on the garden beds, so that's a big thing about, like, I have my garden beds, I try to keep them aerated. If we step onto the bed, what will happen? The stress will push out the air and water. So densification is the term where air is displaced. So first I push and the air comes out. That's called densification. So I have dense soil to form pores between the soil grains, and then afterwards we have compacted soil. So compacted soil is almost so compacted there's no water. So first air, then water, and then the soil dies. It doesn't have air or water. So here we can see a layer in the soil profile. So the top is kind of aerated, and then there's this compacted or densified layer, and it's so tight that the water doesn't actually drain through, neither does the air, and then the microbial activity in that area is pretty much dead. So consolidation happens when stress is applied that causes densification due to the water being displaced from the soil grains. So as I have a nice aerated one, I press it, the air and water ratio, remember we had for the soil formation, nice soils, there's a ratio, but when I compress it, I mess up the air ratio, thus the amount of life that can live in that soil is dependent on it having air and water exchanges. So what can cause compaction and consolidation? So compaction is usually the result of heavy machinery compressing the soil and or cattle, something like that. But it can also occur due to the passage of large herds of heavy animals, i.e. elephants, buffalo, elk, etc. So these animals, if they walk and they do what's called a patchy disturbance regime and they don't stay in the same place for a long period of time, the soil is developed to take that. But if it just stands there and keeps compacting it, boom, boom, in the same place, smashing it down, and the animal's just walking in a circle, for instance, then over time it will compress it. Okay, so these are the aspects that we want to look at and how we can change the regimes on our property to stop these types of events. Other things that can cause compaction or consolidation, it can occur to a lack of water. So if we have like a big tree next to our house, and that big oak tree will go under our house and suck out all the water, and the house will sink, and you can get cracks in your foundations and stuff from a tree actually taking the water. And so your house, the weight of your house compacts the soils. So that's one aspect. So what's affected if this happens? Well, affected soils become less able to absorb rainfall. So when we get compacted soils, they can't absorb the rainfall, it won't go through, and then we get movement of water over land, which causes the erosionary events. Plants have difficulty in compacted soil because the mineral grains are pressed together, leaving little space for air and water, which is essential for plant growth. So though the minerals may be present in the soil, the plant is not able to access them because it may be so compressed it can't get its roots there. And or even if it could get the root through, there's no air and water to facilitate the bacteria to make the mineral exchange. So it can't get at the minerals. So the plant cannot take up minerals directly. It needs the exchange. Or for instance, the bacteria eats the mineral and exerts it through, and then there's what we'll see later, the cation ion exchange, where electrical charges, positive and negative charges, exchange the mineral. So how could we fix these problems in a small scale but also on a large scale? So it's called top dressing. So we can top dress plant beds with several inches of compost, and this will improve compacted soils. And in some instances, even in our garden beds, we will need to cut the compost into the bed. And yes, that may disturb our, in a short period of time, that could disturb our fungal networks. But if we're inoculating and building good compost with fungal, they will rebuild. And then if we keep it from being compacted. So it's better to cut the fungal networks and let them rebuild with good compost. They have access to food, than to have compacted, because if it's compacted, they won't live anyway. So they're going to die through the compaction. So we have to decompact them. We cut the compost in, and then if we do that, turn the soil over, we add a mulch layer to protect it from the sun. So anytime we expose the soils in our garden bed, we protect them with mulch. Earthworms and other soil fauna will slowly loosen the soil and can improve the water holding capacity also. So in that instance, if we took like worm castings for our soil mix, and we take the worm castings we put into our potting mix, we take the pot, which is a little nucleus of soil. The worms will start to, over time, hatch into there. So the experiment I assume that we were doing today is every single one of the plants that's sitting on the floor. If we go, and tomorrow I'll grab one. It's been sitting there for 2 months, and I will open it. I will rip the plant out for you, and I will dump the soil out, and you'll see all the worms that hatched due to the food source over a period of time and grew up, and they'll be breeding, after 3 months, a breeding earthworm in that soil condition. And that won't hurt the plant. I take off, the soil, and then I repot it. But we can see that this is the exchange. So we can use earthworms or a small earthworm farm to facilitate breeding of eggs and castings into our garden, to facilitate having these systems in the garden beds. So how can we fix it again? Well, the main aim of soil improvers, so we start to look at how we can improve our soil. So if I have something that I say is a soil improver, what's its main aim? Is to bind the soil particles back together again so they can hold a good structure and they won't compact. So this is an experiment, if you will, of what's a tool that like a soil scientist would use. They'll go to a site and they'll drive this tool into the ground, and they'll take a soil profile. So instead of digging a monster hole, they can pull up the profile. So in this instance, what they did is they took up the profile, they looked at it, and then all they did was spray the surface of the soil with compost tea. So the black layer of turf was compacted, so when they did the profile test, they found it was very compacted. So in order to alleviate the compaction, without plowing, what they did is apply microbes, and the microbes on compost tea actually alleviate the compaction. So following the third application of compost tea to the turf, note the significant decrease in the black layer or compaction. So the microbes actually went down and decompacted the soil through their activity, if you will, by inoculating them. So this is one way to alleviate compaction. People do this a lot, like say football fields. On the football pitch, what do? And they'll go in and just spraying compost tea can decompact the field like in a football pitch. So why would we have the attitude in agriculture that roots only go down a few inches? So people tend to think roots don't go down very far. Most of the time, that's because they hit a compacted layer and they're not really able to penetrate. But if we have decompacted soils or some fissure, we can find that we could go into a cave, for instance, and it's 100 meters from the tree above and the root had penetrated and is hanging in the cave. So the cave going down, looking for minerals and water. If there's a fissure, it will follow it down. So if we can decompact our soils, the roots have more place to look for nutrients. Thus, a bigger root system equals a bigger plant. So the size of your plant being tied to functionally the size of the root system. So what grows through the ceiling of caves? There's pictures of roots. That particular cave, it was 100 meters. So the tree brought down tap roots, 100 meters, looking for minerals and water. So that means that we need to start to think more about the shape and what the root systems of each individual plant looks like. Each root plant is easy to see the profile of the plant, but what does its root profile look like? So when we're designing our food forest, it's important to understand the spatial relationship of the plant, of the tree canopies, but also you have to understand the spatial relationships, and we can have relationships of stacking, the root zones. So these are a lot of different grasses that we may find in a second successional grass system. What we may find as we describe as herbal grasses. And then you can see the different varying depths and spatial relationships of those herbs and their root systems. So they have a very big root mass in comparison to the plant, thus not a herb, not a weed. The relationship is the root system to create the plant. So soil biology is being destroyed by human management. Roots are not going as deep as they should, and water, fertility, and disease protection are lost in our fields and our farms. So we're going to try to dig deeper again. Soil joke, right? And we're going to try to figure out how we can work on that. So if you cut off the top of a plant, will the roots die? Or do they stay? So here we go. Do they fall off? Some people have the misnomer that the roots actually prune themselves. And especially in a permaculture concept, there are some famous teachers that have made those statements online. Guys, they don't prune. That's why you get the increased grass growth. So the roots then push in to regrow. All right? Now what does fall off is the nitrogen fixating bacteria colony no longer has the access to the photosynthesis, thus sugars. They die. Their bodies are then absorbed in to create the new growth of the green growth. And that's why grasses can grow back so fast. So here, this is the turf or a grass, and you see how big the relationships of the root are. And then those roots as the power that can make that grass grow back in only 22 to 28 days. Boom. It's back to fully mature in only 22 to 28 days, depending on your grass. And that's what's happening. So here, 70% we have essential soil, 30% compost tea, wants no weeds, no diseases, and look at the root growth just by adding compost tea. That's what people are leaning towards, just this really simple thing. So tomorrow we'll look at our bioferts, we're going to do our compost teas. So when we start to apply them, and not what's only interesting is I can tell you the theory behind here, and you say, oh, that's cool. But we're going to spray that compost tea, and you'll be able to visibly see the plants respond. It's not I'm telling you that it's good for it, but I can't see it. No, it visibly livens up, it stands up, the colors get more vibrant. Okay, so this is something that we can see the plant likes this. So we can then respond to that. So microbes make hallways and passages in the soil. So the microbes are actually decompacting the soil because they move. Okay, so bacteria makes glues that hold clays, silts, sands, and organic matter together. This is the dispersed state. There's no polysaccharides because the bacteria is not living for some reason. And if we have the polysaccharides, they glue it together. And this is what you were speaking about with the fungal networks or bacterial, microbial, and fungal byproducts that glue particles together, and we get what's called an aggregated state. And that's why when we pick up the compost, we have like what's called aggregated little balls, if you will, crumbly structure. The crumbly structure is the polysaccharides binding the soil particles and minerals together. So fungi are strands that make glue and threads, and they hold bacterial aggregates together. So first we have these bacterial that creates aggregates, and then the fungal network binds the aggregates together. And remember, the bacteria is interacting with the mineral, and then think about the fungal network as a train. So then the mineral gets on the train, and they send it down the train to the tree who said, I want it. So there's some type of exchange, whether it's a vibrational exchange like we speak, or an electrical pulse communication system that they use. Scientists are still not sure. They can measure, though, that the nutrients are moved. So you can do experiments where you can put mineral deficiency here with a soil profile, with a fungal network, add the mineral to this end, and it will move through the soil to the plant requesting, say, with a mineral deficiency. So this is what these things look like. The protozoa, they're going to control your bacterial populations. So they keep the bacteria in check. The nematodes, they're basically keeping the protozoa in check, and they swim through and they open up and they make larger passageways. So they're moving through the water or air structure in the soil. Microtheropods, which engineer larger pores. These are like wood lice that we saw the other day. Any of these type of animals, or larger animals that you'll see, they're living on the others. And then basically we have the roots. They're engineering freeways through the soil. The root helps to decompact soils also. And then they also interacting with our worms and potworms.